I still didn't see the children's book. I know the children's book is here. I haven't seen it.
It's up there.
It's like, oh, new baby, so I want to see it.
I'll get one right after. I'll get one right after.
Oh yeah, they're that's a lot of fingers. There's a sense of anybody. Sure. That's just it. Yeah, I just think the rest of them. Yeah. The library, though, it's just.
And the first year.
Nice to see you. Just open this up in case I need to do it now. In case I do that.
Yeah.
Okay, now I have to go back and find it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, for a day like this, I will get my email and I go back and email. And sometimes it's totally dumb. And then sometimes I went up and I try to look up my biggest trouble with emails is I have to monitor like 7 or 8 times every day. That's a lot. Yeah, my own personal and that's the schools and my work. Like I look at that is my frustration. Once I'm away like this, one day will make me look at it doesn't hurt. Is that from guys?
So you take your hands out. Nice to see you too.
All this stuff in there. I chose 2.
So happy that you're feeling good. Your brain. Close to my concern.
Welcome to all of you. Welcome to Seminar 5. I hope we're in the right space. Multilingual singing for English-speaking congregations. My name is Snippe.
I'm María Cornou.
And we are working with this wonderful panel today who will all introduce themselves in just a minute here. Before we get too far down the road, I want to just point out two handouts that you have. Well, three really. You've got a single sheet that Kaitan, one of our panelists, will be talking about. We've got this packet that we're going to be using as this time goes on that's got lots of song examples. And then you have one more coming down the road. This is a free handout courtesy of GAA Publications, hot off the press last week. Wow. We're not going to use it really for our seminar, but we did want to mention that Maria and I, along with Batastini, who's at the end, and Marcell, and a few others have been working on a bilingual Spanish-English hymnal that will be due out hopefully this summer. Wow. This is a little foretaste of that, and a small sampler collection that is available from GIA Publications for sale up at their booth. But because you're here today, you get a free copy to take home.
Gracias.
Thank you. So those will just be coming down the rows here, and we're just going to get started. Maria and I are going to take turns asking our wonderful panelists questions. The first is, let's just go straight down the line, starting with Ron. Okay? If you could introduce yourselves and say where you work or where you're from.
My name is Ron Rienstra. I'm a professor of preaching and worship arts at Western Theological Seminary in Holland, Michigan.
My name is Chau. I'm on staff with CICW. Mostly work with Chinese resources, and I'm also an editor for the Reform Worship magazine.
My name is Ciesielski. I'm a pastor in Germany, in the Church of Westphalia, in a local congregation there. And I have been working with the worship committee of the World Communion of Reformed Churches for 1.5 years. And I'm here to tell you a little about that.
Hi, I'm Marcell Steuernagel. I teach church music at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and I direct. We have a master's program in sacred music, and I direct that.
So my name is Jaewoo. I'm working in the area of ministry development for a ministry called Proskuneo Ministries, which means worship in Greek. It's a multicultural ministry and community based in near at Clarkston, city called Clarkston, near Atlanta, Georgia.
My name is Bob Batastini. I've been with GIA Publications 52 years. I am now the Senior Editor Emeritus. I also am involved in the music ministry of a parish of a multicultural Hispanic, actually Mexican Anglo parish in Holland, Michigan, and I am director of the Holland Ecumenical Choir.
Thank you. Now we're going to keep you guys on your toes. Maria and I are going to jump around and kind of mix up the order here. So Bob, we're going to start with you. Can you explain your connection to multilingual singing a little bit more? And tell us a little bit more about your congregation in Holland.
Okay. When I retired from GIA, full-time from GIA, I moved from Chicago to just outside of Holland, Michigan, and I found myself in St. Francis de Sales Church in Holland, and it is a multicultural parish. There was a large influx of Mexicans around 1950 began, and the parish is now 55% Hispanic. We very, very much engrossed in multicultural worship. Even though we do have one Mass on Sunday that's in Spanish and 3 that are in English, we sing some Spanish at every liturgy. And at the Spanish liturgy, they sing some English. And our current pastor's been there 15 years, and his predecessor too. They both felt that the goal was to form a single community. So often in parishes like this, you have two churches existing under one roof. Sometimes they even have 2 pastors because the pastor, we have 2 priests, one's German Polish, and the other one is full-blood Irish, and they're both fluent in Spanish. So our musician is of Polish descent. He's fluent in Spanish. So it is a strongly multicultural parish, and it is clearly one community. What often happens, and this is human nature getting in the way. I have two quick stories from my own family. 2 elderly women, one on my wife's side, one on my side. The elderly woman on my wife's side was a member of a church for years and years and years and years and years. She had been a widow by this time. She was 80 years old, but she still drove, and she went to church at 5 o'clock on Saturday every week. One Saturday, the pastor got up at the end and said, "Well, starting next week, this Mass is going to be in Spanish." That woman never set foot in the church again. She was carried in by 6 pallbearers the next time she set foot in church. That's awful, and that's not the way we approach it. Another one, on my side of the family, parish was in a community that was largely Polish-American. Demographics shifted, and one day, she just said to me, "The Mexicans are taking over our church." Again, some terrible pastoral failure there. I can say in Holland, we hear none of that. None of that at all. We are a multicultural community, and we function well that way.
Thank you all. Nina and I met a couple of years ago when we were appointed to serve in the worship planning committee for the World Communion of Reformed Churches. And as you may imagine, it's a big challenge to plan worship in so many different languages. So we'd like to ask Nina, as the first question, a little bit about that conference, your role, and your experience.
Right. So the World Communion of Reformed Churches, which has emerged from the of course, the Reformed World Alliance. They hold their general council every 7 years. And I think in 2010 it was actually located in Grand Rapids. So, and 7 years later, in 2017, we were doing it in Leipzig, Germany. And we thought, well, 2017 might be a good year to do anything in Germany, right? Yeah. As to the Reformation anniversary and such. Yeah, and as Maria said, she and I were on the planning committee of the worship services, and we had a 9 days conference with 12 worship services and prayers. And well, the major challenge actually was that the conference, the General Council, has 4 official languages, which is English, German, Spanish and French. And then there were 2 supported languages, which was Korean and Bahasa Indonesia, so Indonesian. And we didn't want to lose anybody during worship services, because some of those people would not speak English. Well, there were 1,000+ people coming from 100-member churches from more than 200-member churches from more than 100 countries, and not all of them would speak Spanish or English, let's say. So some of them would only speak French, some would only speak Korean. So we didn't want to lose anybody. And this is why we decided that we would do a worship book, well, just similar to that one actually, in size and shape. But we had 6 columns. So we had 6 columns where each worship service would be, well, you could read it parallelly. So, and we would, what we did was planning each worship service in one language, so let's say in English or in German or in Spanish, because that were the languages that our team was most comfortable in. And then we would have it translated in all the other 5 languages. So and everybody could just read along in the language of their choice. And then, during the actual worship services, we would have even more languages. So we would have a reading in Japanese, we would have a prayer in Czech, we would have the blessing in Italian. But everybody could read along in one language of their choice. So yeah, this is, yeah. And actually, Sabina and I did the also the translation into German from the English scratches.
Thank you, Nina. She will share more. Have more stories.
Kaitan, would you be willing to describe your linguistic journey and your immigrant journey here to the United States?
News, right? I just became a United States citizen. Actually, and because there are a lot of uncertainties, like in life, right? So when you arrive at a point that now I'm a U.S. citizen, but there's a government shutdown, right? So I know that the immigration services is funded separately, so it's okay. But the venue that we have to take our oath is under National Archives, so that is under the shutdown problem. So last minute they have to do a lot of shuttle and all that. My linguistic journey, I was born in mainland China in the 60s, and went through some kind of family situations, and just at the eve of Cultural Revolution, and miraculously, the Chinese government allowed me and my sister left China officially in a legal way. So my sister and I, with my mother, we left China. So at that point, in terms of the linguistic part, southern China in Guangzhou, at that time it's called Canton. Canton, Guangzhou is the same place. Cantonese was the main language. I was too young to learn Mandarin or the Putonghua at that time. So my main language, my mother tongue, is Cantonese. Moved to Hong Kong. At that time was a British colony. So English education started in the kindergarten, right from there. So we learned English, Cantonese. As you know, Hong Kong is a very metropolitan place, so a lot of foreigners, British people, American, German people, a lot of people work there, and tourists are there. So the exposure to the world culture was obvious. But our day-to-day language was mainly Cantonese. We were tested on English, but we didn't use it. So shamefully, when I finished college, started to work with the Hong Kong Philharmonic. So very mixed in terms of culture. We got English speakers, Chinese speakers, and a whole variety. And one of my colleagues, an American friend from Indiana, and she has said very clear to me, this cultural experience, that, hey, Kaiton, your English is bad. Very blunt, like any American. And I said, yeah, I was honest. Yeah, because when we learned English, we didn't have to use it. But your Chinese is bad too. So that's why I need you and you need me, right? So together we go to the, we went to the radio station, we record trailers, and she does the English part and I did the Chinese part, so we work together. And later I moved to where did I go? I went to Kansas City, Missouri for grad school, and really first time, 100% time exposed or immersed into the English environment. I have to learn the English, start over again, my grammar, my real English, I have to think in English, write in English, try to dream in English as well. We learned all my English spelling from British English into American English, learn the whole system of what is Fahrenheit.
No one knows, to this day, no one knows.
Right, but anyway, so I lived in that mystery, going back from that. Very briefly, if you go through my journey, you know that we have to be adaptable very quickly, because when I was in China, we learned the metric system. When I went to Hong Kong, we learned the British system, like inch, feet, miles. And when I was in grade 4, grade 5, we went through a 2 years conversion process from British system into metric. So we have to learn the metric system. So it's now deeply entrenched in me. And then when it came to Kansas City, miles. All right, so I can remember that. So we learned it, and then later I moved to Canada. So and then go back to Celsius and kilometers and all that wonderful things. 20 years later, moved back into Grand Rapids, and here I am. Linguistic journey, I just have to summarize it as I'm in choral music, so I'm very blessed in a way that because in choral music we got exposure into church Latin, liturgical Latin, German songs, French songs, Spanish songs. So I am not conversant in all these languages, but I can pick up a little bit here and there, and that's why I'm always interested in language.
Thank you, Petson. Jaewoo, you said
Jaewoo.
I'm very bad with languages. You mentioned when you introduced yourself that you work in a multicultural community. Could you describe it?
Sure. I myself is Korean American. I moved to US when I was a teenager, so there's two cultures in me. Ever since I was a believer, I remember singing in 2 different languages. Even my name is multicultural. In Korea, there's only first name and last name. So my name is Jaewoo, first name, and Kim, last name. When I first came to US, I had to fill out the form, which had a section for the middle name. I didn't know what that was. So I indicated that I don't have a middle name by putting mark X. Now I have a new middle name, Jaewoo X Kim. I come from arguably the most diverse square mile in the US. Clarkson, Georgia is known as Ellis Island of the South. We have 2,500 refugees from all over the world every year resettling in this small town, less than 2-mile radius. So we have more than 60 different languages being spoken, and according to research, we have 80 different unreached people groups or different ethnicities living together in less than 2-mile radius. So in order for us to just worship together, we have no choice but to sing in different languages to reflect that diversity in our community.
Thank you, Stu. Marcell, you mentioned you work at SMU, Southern Methodist University. Can you describe your role there a little bit more and what role multilingual singing plays in it?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm a Brazilian stranded in Texas. So at the very least, I'm constantly dealing with Portuguese, Spanish, and English, and not only because of the geographical location, but also because of the faculty and the students. So occasionally in the classroom, I might transition, and then I'll have a student translate an expression And that's an intentional move. I direct one of the SNU ensembles. It's called Seminary Singers, and instead of designing it as one more, university choir, competing with all the other university choirs, we transitioned from seminary SATB model into a worship lab model. So in a semester, we do a whole bunch of stuff. The other part of that is the legacy. So when I stepped into this job, my predecessor had done Michael Hahn had done a lot of work on global hymnody. And so I just, it's there in my rank and tenure thing that I just have to do global music. And I love it. It's part of the job, it's part of the ethos. And on the research side, as a Brazilian scholar working in the US, I spent a lot of time working with language issues in relation to worship, translation issues, the theological problems connected with that, cultural justice. That's the kind of thing that I tend to focus on in my work, both in performance and in papers and chapters and whatnot.
Obrigada. Ron, could you describe your community?
Sure. So I'm the odd man out here. I know Greek and Hebrew and Latin, but my community is a monocultural community, and we are trying as hard as we can to be something more than and to grow into. And so we make advances every year. But my students, by and large, don't come from communities where their church experiences have suggested that they need to be attentive to other languages. And because the chapel program that I administer is led and planned by students each day, my job is to resource them and then to encourage them, sometimes very directively and sometimes suggestively. What sorts of multilingual ways can they lead worship? How can they be more hospitable to the individuals who are there who do speak different languages, and to the people who we wish were there who would speak different languages, and the people who we know are never going to be there who speak Yoruba, but we want to sing in that language anyways to recognize that we're still sisters and brothers with them and singing alongside them. So unlike many of these other people who are part of multicultural communities, that's part of their DNA, I'm kind of the one who's trying to inject that DNA into my community.
Thank you, Ron. So we're going to transition now from more introductions to talking about the different ways that people on this panel lead multicultural singing in their communities. They've all mentioned a variety of different ways, and so now we want to hear what those are because they provide wonderful examples for all of us to learn from. So Jaewoo, would you be willing to start us off by talking about how you lead a multilingual team and the challenges that that provides in the team itself, as well as the cultural differences?
Sure.
And how this is different maybe from other teams that we're familiar with.
Sure. So we're not getting into examples, but just concepts and...
You can point to examples.
Okay.
But we'll do a lot of the singing at the end,
okay.
as time provides. Yep.
So the verse that I want to give to you is Revelation 21:26, which is all about all nations bringing their glory and honor into the city. So the way we approach multilingual, multi-ethnic, multicultural worship is not merely a coexisting of nations or different cultural groups in the same space, but integrating or co-creating, even if I can say, because it's not just simply nations gonna be there, present each other, but actually contributing their honor and beauty and culture into this new kind of worship. So first, there are worship with unity without diversity. Unity without diversity is something like this. You sing our songs in our language. You learn to sing our song in our language. That's unity, more like uniformity, but there's no diversity. Second example that I want to point out is diversity without unity. It's more like we sing our songs in our language and you sing your song in your language. Something like there's 9 a.m. Korean service, 11 a.m. main service, whatever you call it, 2 p.m. Spanish, Hispanic service. So they are worshiping in the same space, but they may never learn each other's way of worship. Last thing that we as a community try is unity in diversity model. It's more like I sing or I learn to sing your song in our language. I sing your song in our language. So translation is not from always English to other languages, but in multiple ways. I sing your song in our language, and also you sing our song, or you learn to sing our song in your language. So there's intercultural element. Or we may even go further by saying we sing a new song, or we create a new song in multiple languages, which is co-creation model. It is, let me warn you, it is really, really hard to make this happen. First, so be aware it's hard because if you use English word planning resources, such as CCLI, Planning Center, or even Google Translator, or YouTube, they are not multilingual friendly. They are not. You have to spend a lot of time building relationships, learning language and culture. Without those relational time or investment, we fall into the practice of tokenism. And then be aware that whoever is the dominant group, we also have a culture. Like in US, Korean food is known as ethnic food. But when I travel back to Korea, we never say, today let's eat Korean food. We just say, let's have a food, or let's have a meal. Sometimes it's really easy for us to forget that dominant culture also has a very particular culture. And the last advice that I have is take it slow. Don't assume that people will jump into it or will like it or will get it immediately. Take it slow. We have to overly communicate, explain over and over and over again why we are doing this. And then break down into simple steps so people can engage and follow and learn. It takes much more time and efforts. That's all I have to say for now.
Thank you. One of the questions we usually hear from people that are trying multilingual singing is the question of authenticity. So I'd like to ask Marcell, as a scholar and a musician, how to deal with matters of authenticity when you sing in a different musical style or in a different language.
I get stuck with the bad question.
Yeah.
I don't believe in authenticity. There you go. That's my answer. The more I study the history of the music of the church and its song, or whatever you want to call it, the underlying promise of purity of that does not exist. It's messy from beginning to end. And all we can do is kind of analyze how the cultural flows, the musical flows intermingle, and then we end up with these glimpses of things in time that then change. So I think that's good news for church musicians and for congregations who want to sing. There's a really good article by Westermeyer, who's a big-time Lutheran scholar, and he describes a situation where during a hymn singing, someone comes up to him and says, "We don't sing the good Lutheran hymnody anymore." And then he asks the question, "Well, what is this Lutheran hymnody that you speak of?" And the person had this construction of what Lutheran hymnody was and what was the repertoire and the story surrounding the repertoire. And then he breaks it down, because it's Westermeyer, and he's a huge, he's like, nope, we have mixtures of things all the time. That's all we have. And different different fields of scholarship. For example, African American studies will talk about hybridity and the mixtures of these things. I tend to talk about messiness because I think that recognizes the fact that we have no control. We might have some control over the narrative of the music of the church for a given period of time, but that's all we can have, and I'm not sure it's a good idea. So the first thing I want to say is embrace the messiness. The second thing related to authenticity, I think has to do with the question of performance. And as a church music professor, I'm constantly dealing with my students asking me questions about style, and I see how this relates to the way they see themselves as people and as church musicians, as ministers of the church. And I'm left wondering what a church music, how should I educate my students to go out and do a good job? My conclusion is that while I do think they need a solid foundation of music theory and history, for example, those are means to an end. In the end, I am not training specialists. I am training generalists. High-level generalists. Because you never know. They might end up at a place where they have, an organ that has half the stops working, a ukulele, and a saxophone. Bam, there you go. What are you going to do? So the transition, the spectrum involves musical styles, instrumentation, human resources, languages. And there is an authenticity, a beautiful, if I just said it doesn't exist, but if I use the word kind of poetically, to most of us, the sound of the singing church is the sound of one language. When I read Revelation, for me, the sound of the singing church is as messy as it gets, because it's a whole bunch of these different utterances at the same time. So it's a big transition for us that have grown up with one paradigm to learn to hear the voice of the church as a voice that is multilingual, multiphonetic, so many multis, right? And so I think that becomes a goal that you move towards, and then you become comfortable with the awkwardness of doing something in a different way. Cuando yo hablo español, when I speak Spanish as a Brazilian. I don't speak it as an art, and it took me a while to be able to come to terms with that I didn't have to sound like a Cuban or an Argentinian, right? So these are different. I still want to be able to do that, right? I still want to be able to sing the songs. So making that leap, we always say to each other, well, I don't know how you don't know what I'm feeling. You don't know what my life is like. That is true, but in song we have an opportunity to voice the song together. And I think that is something that we need to intentionally do. So if there is any kind of authenticity, I think it's sort of a biblical, ethical authenticity to voice the song of the other. That's it.
Thank you, Marcell. It is indeed messy. Kaitan, it gets messier, doesn't it? To introduce politics and language, it gets messier. So I'm going to ask you two questions here. First, about politics. If you could describe the messiness of politics and language that you've experienced, but then lead us into tonal language, which is its own messiness. For those of us who speak English.
All right. Political side is always dangerous to talk about. It is a very sensitive time in the US and many parts of the world. But when we talk about Chinese language, we have to understand that Chinese language is not one language. It is a language and has multiple dialects, and we don't share our language as often. Give an example. For about 6 or 7 years, I was in Hong Kong attending a Chinese church, but culturally I'm a foreigner for that church. Why? Because in that particular church, these are what we call boat people. People live in boats. They are fishermen. And they have their own language, their own culture, and they all laughed at me because I'm not part of that culture. So they use something I would describe, it's a rainy day. And I said, what? And I didn't know that word means rain. or we play with toys, stuffed animals. I said, well, what does that mean? So I keep asking this kind of question. So even being a Chinese person, it doesn't mean that we can communicate that easily, just because of the dialect, because of the words that we use and the culture we live in. Chinese language went through a multiple change, some forced by the government and some kind of evolved naturally. So when we talk about the Chinese language, in the written part, if you are Mandarin speaking, let me backtrack. In terms of written Chinese, there are two main streams. One is what we call the standard Chinese or traditional Chinese, which is the language I use the most often. And the language that's used mainly in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, maybe some other countries in Southeast Asia. When the communist government took over China in 1949, the government felt that the traditional Chinese is very hard to learn because there's so many strokes there. And so they promote a style of writing. It's called the simplified Chinese. So because China has to deal with illiteracy, it's such a big problem, and Chinese is so hard to learn even for Chinese people. So they promoted the simplified Chinese as a written language. So now we have traditional standard Chinese and the simplified Chinese as the written language. The second layer to that is in the Mandarin language dialect, they speak like they write, which is great. I like English, you speak as you write. Standard Chinese speaker, particularly in the Cantonese culture, we speak a dialect called Cantonese. We still write in Chinese, standard Chinese, but we don't speak it like that way. If you speak it like you're like reading, it's not talking. So we have a conversational Chinese that is different from the written Chinese. So as you read something, we will just change it into our dialect way of communication. So that adds a second level of complexity to the language. And now, the tension there, the political thing there is, because if you use the written language of simplified Chinese, it signifies that you are from mainland China. And so that signifies, that gives a signal that you are from that culture, from that place, and that's the language that you use. If you are from Taiwan, that signifies that you use standard Chinese. And if you're from Hong Kong, you see the Chinese language written, but you speak it differently. So that tells where you are from. So in a Chinese service, we constantly deal with a big challenge here is when we have PowerPoint, do we use standard Chinese, traditional Chinese, or the simplified Chinese? Because one way or the other, you signal that you are leaning towards one over the other. The other might not be happy. All right, and then they are thinking that now they are taking over our culture, no matter which part you are from. So whenever we have PowerPoint, we have to think through that very carefully because we don't want one people group to be felt left out or overtaken by the other side. And the struggle is real. So I attended a church, a Chinese church in Jacksonville, just as a visit. And then they use a certain way, and then you immediately feel that, okay, you label them very quickly. So we have to be very careful on that. The other part of the tonal language is, you probably heard about that a lot, because the Mandarin Chinese has 4 tones, and the Cantonese Chinese has 9 tones. And if you use the wrong tone, that means differently. So the silly thing about that is the word Lord. In Chinese, if you pronounce it wrong, in the wrong tone, it means a pig, which is not very nice. The Chinese language was struggling for a long time because when we translated hymns into Chinese, the first generation, second generation translators, they didn't take care of that kind of issues. So now it became a joke for a lot of non-Christian community, like your Lord is a pig. It's really not nice. And then a lot of words almost sounds like foul languages, and that become like a big joke. Especially, so the newer generation say, let us take care of that. So they try to write songs in a way that it will fit the tonal language. So what we are saying that if you are a good writer, if you're a good songwriter or lyrics writer, your work will reflect the tonal language a lot easier. And actually, because of the tonal nature, if you write well, the text, the lyrics, if you write well, the music almost comes out from the text already. So you have a little room to manipulate that. Now, because of that, we as an older generation, I'm like 50 some years old, 50, I forgot. Anyway, so I am from a culture that we learn all this like joy to the world in Chinese. So we are deeply entrenched with that translation and with that weird translation. And the newer generation, no, that's not right. So let's deal with the right one. So we have to relearn some new old songs, but new lyrics. And it may give you different images because of the new text. So we are constantly in that learning mode, or just want to relearn song all the times. Some people are very happy about that because now we have a language that fits the music, or music fits the language. And some people like say, why are we doing that? You know, I grew up with that lyrics. And I know by heart. Now, why do I have to relearn it? So, again, political thing is, why do we do it? I'm not happy. And somebody said that you should do it because it's better.
Thank you. Nina, could you share with us a little bit about what you learned being involved in the planning of these multilingual services and the challenges we faced as a group?
So what did I learn? I learned that there are many songs that I have known for ages that also exist in other languages. And I learned that some of those songs, Sonne der Gerechtigkeit, gehe auf zu unserer Zeit. You might know that in English, right? Don't? Okay. Well, we might sing that later. I might not, because I am not allowed to sing practically, but right now, due to my voice. But so this is one song that had been written in a place that is now the Czech Republic, but was then German-speaking by the Bohemian Brothers. And it fits so well for one of those worship services for the whole subject that we created. And so in English that would be the Sun of Righteousness arise over our nation's skies or something, right? So that would be about the Sun of Righteousness shining above all. And so that would fit perfectly. And I thought, well, okay, one could sing that in German, right? And well, let's see if there are some other languages. And I think there were like 15. So because the Bohemian Brothers who wrote this were big missionaries, and they brought that song to all over the world, actually. So and I didn't know that before. So that's one thing that I've learned. Then it was really tricky, not only about the singing part, but about the translating in advance, because, well, we tried to embrace just language. So let's say gender just language for once, which is in English quite easy, as you might not have realized yet. But so of course in English one can say gracious God, and then God would not have a gender yet, right? But in nearly every other language, you have to, as soon as you put an attribute, the gracious, you have to pick which gender God is. And that, I don't want that, but you have to decide. So, yeah, that was one of the main challenges actually while translating all those texts, because it is not just, well, of course you can use Google Translator, let's say, but prayers and responsorials and such are poetic texts, or at least we try to make them poetic texts. So you cannot just translate them word by word, but sometimes you have a theme that goes through all of the prayer that does not translate in any other language. So we did our best we could to actually translate those. And what we did as well concerning songs is, well, some of the songs we had written, especially for our occasion. We had actually 4 theme songs that would match our theme, Living God, Renew and Transform Us. And, well, I think, 3 of them were written in English originally, and then the others were written in Spanish originally. But we had them all translated in at least 2 other languages, which was one step further on the ladder of translation difficulty, because this is not just okay, it would be nice if this and that pattern would show through in other languages, but of course it also has to match the rhythm and we did not have to deal with the tonality, of course, of the language, because we did not translate into Chinese. But still, of course, it has to sound right, and you have to stress the right syllables, etc. So, and some of those songs I still like to sing better in English or even French than in German, because in German it's not quite the right nuance, you know, it's not quite the right shade of what it means, and it's got a weird taste. You cannot really sing it right. I prefer to sing it in another language than my mother tongue. So what we did a lot was actually having, let's say, 3 verses of a song, printed out in, let's say, English with the musical notes above, and then we had 5 other languages. As I said, German, but also Italian, Czech, Norwegian, Kiswahili. And then we would just say, okay, sing in a language of your choice. And for me, as I'm a little bit of a control freak, it was a bad thought. I couldn't quite imagine how that would actually sound, but it was beautiful. So I learned to actually embrace the messiness of all those people joining in together to one song, and into one. It was the same thing that they were singing. It might stress another woe, you know, but it was the same thing that they were singing. It was the same tune that they were singing, worshipping the same God. So I really learned to embrace that messiness by that.
Thank you, Mia. You mentioned you've been at GA for 52 years, is that what you said?
Mm-hmm. I was 9 when I started.
In that time, you've seen a lot of changes not only at GAA, but in the Catholic Church and in the Church in the United States in general. Would you be willing to explain the connection to Vatican II and that GAA has, as well as the influences of global singing on the publication processes at GAA?
Okay, well, first of all, GIA is independently owned. We're not actually affiliated with the Catholic Church, but the history of the company was founded primarily to publish music for the Catholic Church. But we have done about 30 hymnals in the last, I don't know how many years, and at least 6 or 7 of them are not Roman Catholic. They're either non-denominational or specific. And we published the Calvin Institute choral series. So, you know, in fact, when the Iona community decided to attach themselves to GIA, it was because they thought we were the most ecumenical of the publishers that were interested. And we pride in that. I said that I direct the ecumenical choir in Holland. I have been an ecumeniac since Vatican II. A lot of people my age rebelled against Vatican II. I totally embraced it and just saw, you know, when we stand together in a Christian, in an interdenominational worship, and all together we recite the Nicene Creed, Protestants and Catholics are gonna go, so what's the problem? When we can stand there together and recite that creed. GIA, we have had an interest, not so much the predecessors, but the present management ownership of GIA took over in 1967, which was 52 years ago, which is when I started. And we immediately, and I think it was largely came from my involvement in the Hymn Society. And we had the executive director of the Hymn Society here, Mike McMahon. My involvement in the Hymn Society started in the 70s, and I really became exposed to other Christian traditions. And that led us to develop an interest in serving the broader church, not just the Roman Catholic Church, but the broader. I was instrumental in bringing the music of Taizé to America. I've been to Taizé many times, and especially in the 80s, I was there frequently, and I had a lot of experience with singing in multiple languages, and we. Personally, my only experience is in a parish church. I'm not an educator, and you know, I'm not on the world scene in terms of this topic especially. But my experience is in my own parish, and I guess I had it easy compared to some of my colleagues here because I'm only dealing with Spanish and English. But you know, GIA has had a mission to serve the former president. He's retired now. The fellow that I went to work for in 1967, he stated the mission statement for GIA, and it's really interesting. It's one sentence: if we do what's right for the church, it'll be good for business. And I think that his son now is the president, and I think GIA has been loyal to that since day one.
Thank you, Bob. Ron, at Western Theological Seminary, you have studied bilingual services in chapel.
Yeah.
So, if you can share a little bit about.
So, it's. I don't know that I would say we do bilingual chapel. What I think I sort of administer the program. So part of what I do is in each season I create a handful of templates for each liturgical season that the students will use to begin their service planning. And what we've begun doing in this past year or two is that in every season, at least one of the templates is dominated by Spanish language songs and Spanish language liturgical moments. And as I say, I mean, the reason why we do that is I kind of said that last time. It's partly what we heard before. The vision in Revelation is a messy, multilingual vision, and partly because we want to be hospitable, and I say we, and I'm aware that there's a funniness there about that, because I'm the Anglo guy, and I recognize that we're the ones who have had power in that community for a long time. And so what we're trying to do is give that away and trying to say, no, we actually want to be hospitable and accommodate so that we're not the ones in control here necessarily, so that we actually have to listen a little bit harder to people with accents, that we actually have to learn to wrap our tongues and our lips around the syllables of other people, because that's what's going to happen when we end up in the kingdom all together. So, I mean, that's, I think, the reason why we do that. And it isn't like we say, hey, it's Spanish chapel today. No, it just happens to be Tuesday, and the person who was planning Tuesday said, oh, I want to use those songs and those words and those gestures, and those are dominated by the Spanish language.
Thank you, Ron. We want to make sure that we've still got plenty of time left, but we want to make sure before we leave that we resource all of you as well. And that at the end, if we have time, questions from you as well. So we're going to move into a time of resourcing and talking about different models of bilingual singing or multilingual singing. So Jaewoo, can you start us off by talking about some of the different models?
Sure. You have resource, but the way we teach or learn song in our community, not all the time, but it's not by chart or score music. So I'm gonna teach you first, and then I'll let you begin, okay? How does that sound? So one day, it's a grassroots model. One day in our community, we share a lot of meals together. Different people come together, but we felt like we needed a song for the grace, prayer before the meal. So that day, we had a person who speaks Spanish, Korean, Swahili, and Arabic, and we started having this conversation. How do you say thank you in your language? So we came up with 4 languages. So you can repeat after me. In Arabic, thank you goes like this: Shukran, 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 Shukran. Okay, and then in Korean is 감사해, 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 감사해. And then in Spanish, gracias, of course. Gracias. Yes. And then in Swahili, Kiswahili, asante, asante, asante. Okay. So I'm gonna invite my wife to the piano. Thank you. And now I'll let you see the chart. Page 18. Okay, so we'll work on the chorus. This song works whether with guitar, piano, or no instrument, okay, or just percussion, or just the voices. Song goes like this. Shukran, 감사해, gracias, asante. Repeat. Shukran, 감사해, gracias, asante. Now, can we not look at the chart? And if you want to clap, that's what we do in our community. And that's just 4 that we're going to repeat several times. Okay? Shukran, 감사해, gracias, asante. Shukran, 감사해, gracias, asante, asante. Shukran, 감사해, gracias, this song, second part, has a call and response part. So I'm gonna call in Korean, and you will respond in Korean. Okay? How will you respond in Korean? Just saying this, repeat after me. 감사해, everybody. 감사해. I'm gonna call, and you say 감사해. 감사해. Here we go. 오늘 우리 모여 감사해. 생명 주신 주께 감사해. 우리 하나 되신 감사해. 놀라우신 주께 감사해. 슈크란, 슈크란, 감사해. Gracias, gracias, asante, asante. 슈크란, 감사해, 감사해. Gracias, gracias, asante. will totally create new way or melody or even verses that that he is thankful for. He will just vocalize it. Or someone who speaks Arabic will call it and will respond in Arabic. So this song can go forever, for an hour or two. So this is an example of let's sing a new song in multiple languages. Remember, it's not you sing my song in my language or I sing your song in your language. Those are all great, but this is a new model reflecting the diversity in community. Community can come up with very simple song that reflect the season or event or occasion or just being together. Second model, second example I'm going to present is Psalm 17, page 22. So due to the time, we're going to go jump right into the multilingual singing part. The first part, actually we have a songwriter called it. So we're going to skip the first part in English. We'll jump into multilingual singing part. You can actually open page 24. So this is also unity in diversity model. It's kind of messy but beautiful model. This is one song written in multiple languages. It's kind of choir, having different layers of melody in different languages. Who wants to sing in Swahili? I need about 5 volunteers. Who wants to sing in Swahili? Okay, so it goes like this. Volunteers who can sing in Spanish. Okay, so it goes like this. Keep singing the Swahili part if you're ready. Spanish part. Here we go. Alaben a Dios. Alaben a Dios. Repeat that. Alaben a Dios. Alaben a Dios. Keep singing that. María, about 5 people. Sing with me. Yahweh to Maria with me. Rest of you will sing Hallelujah, Hallelujah.
Thank you. Bob, you mentioned a little bit about bringing Taizé, about Iona, and we know also GIA works with other bilingual or multilingual resources. Could you explain a little bit what kind of resources they can find in this publication company?
Well, I think when you talk about multiple languages, obviously Iona is the greatest source you'll find at GIA. And that's because John Bell, whom I imagine most of you encountered at some point in your life, John Bell is a world traveler. He's been all over the globe. They say every 6 points of, 6 points of separation. If you know John Bell, it's probably 3 points of separation. Because he's been everywhere. And he collects songs. And he has brought so much to the public through publishing, through the Iona community, and published in America by GIA. Taizé is an unbelievable place. Originally, let's put it this way. Originally, they sang a lot in Western European languages. And then once the Soviet thumb come off of Eastern European countries, then there became a great influx of Poles and Lithuanians and Russians. They started out at Taizé trying to get everybody to sing in French, and they found out how futile that was. So then they went to Latin, because Latin was a language with which everyone was equally uncomfortable. and I think it kind of started with a song I think we all know probably, Jesus Remember Me When You Come. That was one of their first real hits in a living language, and that taught them. So as Taizé has evolved, we have one Taizé piece in here, and we really don't have to do anything more than just be aware. You'll see Wait for the Lord is on page, right near the beginning.
11.
Page 11. This is just an example. You see it Spanish, English, Polish, Italian, and Vietnamese. And I in my many times at Taizé, I did hear people singing in multiple languages all at once. And it is beautiful. It's not at all. If you're listening, it may sound like chaos, but the idea is that no one's supposed to listen. We're all part of the conversation. We all sing. And what I find is you hear yourself. I was at Taizé one time in October where the German schools were on holiday. So there was one American and about 900 Germans there. And so I was surrounded by people singing in German all the time while I'm singing in English. And that was, I have no German skills at all. That was like an orchestra around me, people singing. And it really, really does work. The other thing GIA has done, we, of course, being that we do service the Roman Catholic market in a large way, a large part of our business, we developed, now it's almost 10 years ago, we started a project to do a bilingual hymnal. It's been published. It's called O Ramos Cantando. And the entire book is bilingual cover to cover. Everything in the book is in both languages. And we use that in our parish in Holland, and it is highly, highly successful. So much so that I approached the Calvin Institute about doing a Protestant version. And originally I said, we'll do a hymnal by diminution. We'll just take out the Catholic stuff. Well, it has grown much bigger than that. And it's a huge project, and I'm happy to say that the Calvin Institute has taken on the whole editorial work of this. GIA is printing and publishing. It's going to be a wonderful collection. It's going to represent many Hispanic cultures. Again, though, everything in the book will be in 2 languages. And it's going to be out this summer. We're hoping to have it to showcase at the Hymn Society Conference in Dallas this coming Sunday. So, that's another wonderful project. And this is a little sampling of what it looks like. These are taken from that project. That's about the extent of the work we do. We did publish a hymnal that Itolo had put together, Sound the Bamboo. We published that here in this country, and later we published, we were the original publisher of the companion to Sound the Bamboo, which gives some great insight to who in Asia is writing Christian church music. So that's about the extent of where we are. I have to say, in all honesty, that the bulk of our work is in English-Spanish. I mean, of our multilingual, it's with Spanish.
Thank you, Bob. Marcell, can you explain some more places where people can find resources specifically specifically about how to train worship leaders to lead in various languages, connected to what you talked about earlier.
Yeah, well, in terms of resources, YouTube. So I keep thinking about the value of the curator in the digital era. I mean, basically, we don't have time to go through every single thing that everyone puts out to then make decisions about what we're going to see next Sunday. I mean, this is practically, it's unpractical. It's not going to happen, right? But having said that, I tend to teach with YouTube all the time for one reason, because links lead to links. And if you show interest, Google's algorithm will take you in that direction. And I found that that's one of the more powerful pedagogical tools at my disposal. And the other thing is people. Because of the performance issue, I find it very difficult, for example, to take a song that I don't know in a style that I'm not familiar with in a language I don't know, and drop it in the middle of chapel at Perkins, you know, at SMU. It's awkward for everyone involved. And I don't mind it being awkward, but I do want to lead worship in a way that is hospitable, right? So being able to work, and that's why I think like that places like this, I mean, if I have a student coming to me needing immediate access to a whole, like a multicultural perspective, I'm going to send them here, because there's no other place doing what is being done here in this particular way. And because this is where you meet the people. So I tend to operate on those two axes all the time, people and the internet. And then my wife walks in the room and I'm watching YouTube videos and she asks, okay, what are you doing? I said, I'm working. She says, no, you're not. Yeah, right.
It's the cat ones that throw it.
Yes, the cat ones, yeah. So, and then the second part, so, okay, that's the first point. And I know it's very broad and might not be useful. It's still what I tend to gravitate towards. When I have a song, when I have a question about African rep, I'll look for someone on the ground to help me answer that question. Because a lot of times, if we look to the publications, you have a lot of things, and Bobby might have many stories in this vein where, you know, some missionary goes somewhere, hears a song, comes back, writes it down, copyrights it, and now I can't play it without paying dues back in the original country, which might not even be the original country, because of the way that geographical lines are divided is not how cultural flows kind of operate. So there's all these underlying issues. When I have a song, I try to find a voice for me to listen to that song. The second part, which is how to teach or how to prepare worship leaders to deal with this, I think a lot of it has to do with the uncomfortable nature of learning the new. So it can be a new language or a new, if you've never danced before, you go to a dance class and you have to dance this thing and your body doesn't respond, it's awkward, right? But there seems to be a threshold when you embrace the awkwardness and it becomes part of your performance of that particular thing, be it whatever it is. I'll give you an example. Really, we're not going to see this, but I'll take an extreme example. The Battle Hymn of the Republic. Horrible, I know, but still, it's going to work. Look at this. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Right? So, before working in academia, I was a worship and arts minister for a long time, and this is how we would do this song at my church. That's how we would play the song on Sunday, and no one had a problem with it, because that's kind of what we do. The rhythm kind of, you're supposed to find that spot and then just groove with the song, and it's a natural. So sometimes changing the lyrics is what creates the awkwardness. Sometimes you can have the same lyrics and you change the music, you create a new kind of awkwardness. So what I'm encouraging students to do is to find that neighboring space where it's just out of your comfort zone and step into that. For some CCM worship leaders, for example, it's African American gospel. They don't know what to do with it because they haven't dealt with that rep. So I'm saying, okay, we'll start with some really, SATB arrangements. So let's move forward. We'll slowly do this thing. For some of them, it's Latino music. They're working in congregations that have a strong Latino population, and they want to learn to lead the Cuban guajira or a vaneron or whatever it is. And so say, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next chain in the link that can lead us in that direction? You don't have to play salsa like Quito Puente, but you can walk, you can move in that direction. So I think in terms of pedagogy, that offers a lot more hope than you'll never be able to pull that off, right? There's a proficiency to be gained by stepping out of your comfort zone that is special in this regard. I tend to push students in those directions.
Thanks.
Are we allowed to ask questions? I just did, so.
I'm Latin American. Flexibility is our motto. So.
Just a general question, and maybe you guys will address this, or maybe this is part of it, but how do you introduce a congregation that speaks the predominant language to the importance of singing in other languages? So if it's an English-speaking dominant, or if it's German, or if it's whatever, how do you stress the importance of, here's why we're going to do this, or here's why this is important for us to be able to do that when they say, like, why do we need to do this? Because we don't have anybody in our community who speaks Swahili or speaks whatever. How do you, with your individual congregations or schools, handle that?
I have practical suggestions. I assume that they have never heard the reason why we have to do this, so I overly communicate or emphasize by saying in our church's neighborhood there are increasing number of certain people groups and they have to speak this language. So we will learn a phrase and say it, or incorporate that into this song. Like for example, song is holy, holy, holy. Translate it into different languages, Korean or Spanish or different languages. Or do you know in our congregation we have someone who speaks this language? So in honor of that culture or that person, why don't we, say this or learn a song? Or you can even say, do you know one day the Bible talks about that all nations will worship together? So in reflection of worship in heaven. Or I hear this a lot. Why do we have to sing in Chinese when no one in our church speaks Chinese? Then, or in Arabic, you can point to the reality of suffering or church that are going through the persecution. Our brothers and sisters in different parts of the world are going through this. So in honor of or remembrance of, or in order to pray for that, why don't we? So just constantly giving them different reason. Sometimes point them to the context, neighborhood changes, demographics. Sometimes people in your congregation or future reality of heaven. There are multiple ways, but you have to overly communicate why we are doing this, because it will make people uncomfortable.
So just to piggyback on this, we often think of the songs that we sing in worship as, this is my congregation's expression of praise or thanksgiving or confession or whatever. But to remember that often we are singing and praying on behalf of others. It's ours, yes, but it really is on behalf of others. And it seems to me to have more integrity to pray on behalf of others in other languages.
And it also reminds us that the body of Christ does not all consist of English speakers.
Yeah.
It's just a way of reminding the Christians in our parish that it's a big world out there. The Christian world is a big world.
I sometimes give a challenge to my church, our church, because as I said earlier, language could be a very political process, right? So either you pick one, it seems to side with one language. So let's all be uncomfortable. Let's sing in African language.
Yeah.
Imagine this Chinese church, not as expressive, but And suddenly that process helps us to realize that singing in somebody else's language is learning, is accommodation, is humbleness, is opening our eyes. So it's not just you go with my language. Why do I have to go with your language? That's not my culture and that kind of argument. Let's learn something, because church is not just here and now. It's a worldwide historic and the longitude and latitude understanding. So that helps our people to open our eyes.
A friend of mine, she is a really, really loving pastor. I mean, you can't interact with her and not think that she doesn't love you, even if she's only just met you. And she has this, I've seen her do this. After the service, someone says, I didn't like that we sang such and such a song. And she looks at them and she genuinely is loving, and she says, how wonderful that you got a gift today to remember that this isn't about what you like. I mean, she is genuinely happy that you learned this lesson, even though you may just be learning it as she's speaking that word to you. And some people with more sour personalities probably couldn't get away with saying something like that, but she can.
Because I serve in a multilingual, multicultural congregation, the way we started was when we were moving into the Lord's Prayer, I'll say, and pray in your native tongue. And it was amazing the responses that the English speaker said. Oh, that was so wonderful to hear that, or that was strange, and it doesn't match up, but it is that reminder, particularly for Americans, we are not just the church.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, Ton, you told, when we sat down a couple months ago, Maria and I, about an early encounter with the bilingual hymnal. Would you be willing to tell us about that story?
Interesting that I brought some examples here. They're from the Government Library and some of them are mine. And because the Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, we're talking about very multicultural metropolitan centers. So we have been exposed to a lot of Western hymns from a very young age. So if you take a quick look at any of the so-called standard Chinese hymnals, I would say 99% of them are bilingual, fully bilingual. So they are usually printed either way. In the old times, again, language is political. Do you put the English words first and then Chinese, or Chinese first English? People are sensitive for that kind of things. And so you have both languages there. Of course, in our day-to-day or week-to-week services, we would use the Chinese. So we'll sing the Western hymns translated in Chinese. And in any standard hymnals, I would say about 99% are Western hymns. Very little, very small amount Chinese written, Chinese melody. If they are included, they are not used often because those are unfamiliar songs. Now because of the multiple language, you got 4 verses already, and so physically you have 8 verses printed, typeset, so it's not easy. So sometimes you have to be creative, have the English text there, the Chinese text there, or elsewhere. And the recent trend is to have the song printed twice. So fully English on one side, flip the page, you got fully Chinese. So bilingual hymnal is the kind of norm that we have. So you can choose to sing English, you can choose to sing Chinese, and by the way, when you do the Chinese version, you can choose to sing in Mandarin or Cantonese and your other local dialects if you like. So that's the general. So that's why fully bilingual resources is always available if you look at most Chinese hymnals.
Thank you. As it happened to Nina and me, and perhaps you have been already in this kind of experience, but it could happen to you in the future, that you have to plan a worship service in different languages, a larger scale or a smaller scale. But Nina, what would be your advice for those who in the future may face the challenge?
So one has already been stolen by Marcell, actually. Use people. That would be my biggest advice. So do not do a song that you haven't heard. That you only know by paper, let's say. Do not do a song that is not familiar to you by a musical style or by language. It will not be nice for you to teach that song, and it will not be nice for others to listen. And it will not be, it will be way more contagious if you know what you're doing, right? That is basically for every single step of worship, of course. But for singing, I am under the impression that this is specific. I want to stress that. Try to find somebody. If you approach it like, I want to do an Italian song on Sunday, then find somebody who can give you resources, who can advise you on, okay, that might fit the subject of the worship service, and it is Italian, let's say, and who can also teach either you to how to pronounce it correctly, because I find it very embarrassing to pronounce lyrics and to mispronounce lyrics, even if nobody knows. But I find it very embarrassing. So, or ask the person if they can lead it on that very Sunday, and then the congregation will have it heard once by a native speaker or by someone who knows the language, who can speak the language, and then they will know better when you redo it on another week, and then you might be a little more comfortable as well if you leave it the next time.
Thank you, Nina. Ron, what advice or techniques would you have for people leading a multilingual service? You provided us with a lot of examples of a variety of different directions to go.
So I 100% agree with what Nina said, and yet I find there's some temptations in trying to follow that are problematic. So for example, if I have a choice of 14 different students that could sing, and one of them is a native Spanish speaker, one is an African American, and she's steeped in the gospel tradition, I don't want to only ask Joanna to sing when we're singing the gospel song, and I don't want to ask Sandra to sing only when we're singing the Spanish song. I want to even if that means a slightly more awkward modeling, right? I want her to listen to this YouTube and become familiar with it so that you can lead it in a contagious way. But so if I only waited until I had the people that I wanted, we wouldn't do it. So my first piece of advice is, number one, don't use only native speakers or singers for just those songs and not for the others. And then don't wait until you have a native speaker to try to be a little bit awkward about some of these things. I guess those are my two things. And then especially for folks who feel really awkward about singing different. And there it is, and you printed it up in one language, but so here's page 42, I think. Yeah, right. So here is this song, which you could sing all the way through just in Spanish. Ven Espíritu Santo, ven viene nuestro llamado, ven y enséñanos el fuego en esperanza liberado. That's the Spanish. And the English is, come, O Holy Spirit, come and hear the plea of your people, come and teach your church to be a call of hope and freedom. You see that the music is the same, the first two lines and the second two lines. But what we've done here is we put the Spanish first, Ven Espíritu Santo, and then we jump into English, come and hear the plea of your people, and then we reverse that in the second half. So as opposed to having the English and then this Spanish second, right? So that political thing of which comes first and which goes second and which is more important, well, it's mixed up right there. And if you paid attention to what the English is, if you're an English speaker, you know what the Spanish is. So that's the sort of thing that you can do in any number of languages. So there are a couple of other examples of that same kind of a thing. And then another small advice is whether in Spanish, which is the language that we're trying to reach most into, but any other language, if the phrase is relatively short and it isn't hard to wrap, or even if it is a little bit hard to wrap, if it's short enough, people can learn it and they're willing to try. Again, if you explain why we're doing it, and you have someone speak it out loud and then say, so now you try, say this after me in exactly the way we had it modeled for us here. That kind of thing, but the shorter song as opposed to a 4-stanza strophic hymn on the Trinity that we're going to try to do in another language. No, pick a tiny song, just a tiny, a Kyrie, but maybe not in Greek, maybe in Urdu or something like that. So there are a couple of those sorts of examples in the book.
Thank you. We're going to sing some examples for a few minutes. We're going to start down at the other end. Bob, would you like to model some self-translating songs?
Sure. I think the biggest mistake we can make with in a parish church like mine is to take a strophic hymn and say, we'll sing stanza 1 in English, stanza 2 in Spanish, stanza. After a while, both groups who do not speak the other language are going to be annoyed by constantly singing words they don't understand. So I think the idea of understanding what you've sung is not a problem. We do responsorial psalms in the liturgy of the word, and we often do self-translating refrains. El Señor es mi pastor, nada me falta. The Lord is my shepherd, nothing I shall want. People don't mind doing that because it's self-translating. We sing bilingual settings of the Santo, 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 Holy, Holy, Holy. It's all self-translating. They know what they're singing. Look here at, we'll start page 4. Here's a hymn we do in our parish a lot. I don't know, I'm not going to even use the piano, I'll just pick a key. But whenever we have a piece like this, the unwritten rule in the congregation is you sing the refrain twice, once in English, once in Spanish. Hallelujah, 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 el Señor resucitó. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Christ is risen from the dead. You'll never get pushback from doing that sort of thing because you're not asking people to sing. It self-translates. You could have a soloist sing the verse, and then when you get to that last line, demos gracias al Señor, well, I was way too high. Hallelujah, to God our glad thanksgiving, hallelujah. Again, that last phrase repeats. Do it once in Spanish, once in English, each time. That sort of thing. Look at the next page. There's another hymn we do a whole lot during the Advent season. Ven Salvador, ven sin tardar, tu pueblo santo esperando está. Come quickly, Lord, come without delay. And we'll often just, because we use this at communion time, because communion time takes a long time, we'll do all 10 verses. We'll do it in Spanish and English, but we always do the refrain both languages, and there's no pushback from that, none whatsoever. Next page. You take a really well-known hymn, and here you can get away with, let's do stanza 1 in English, stanza 2 in Spanish. You're not going to get pushback on something like this because it's a hymn everybody knows in their own language and they sing it a lot. But if you take something less familiar and you try that, I've learned, people will only be quiet for a limited amount of time if they're continually asked to sing things they don't understand. Because liturgy should be cognitive. Look at the next page. I just did this for, when you take something really, really well known, like Silent Night, you can do a free-for-all. Sing it in any language. Have you ever done that sort of thing? Yeah. Not many. How many know, we got German, Spanish, and French. How many know Silent Night in other languages? Let's all sing it, real quick. Any language at all. It's not a contest, so you all have to play your words. Something really well known that works beautifully, and it sounded lovely. And I wasn't singing, so normally your own voice blots out the chaos, but I didn't even hear chaos. It was lovely. We can do that with things that are easy. Now that also works with tizé pieces because they're eight measures. So you can easily take a tizé piece and say sing in whatever language. I experience that all the time at tizé. And at first I thought, in fact, tizé they would do morning prayer and they actually printed traditional Western hymns in 4, 5, 6 languages, and people would sing them. And at first I thought, oh my God, this is going to be chaotic, and it wasn't at all. So this is another way of approaching it. My only caution is I think it's very important that most of the time people know what they're singing in terms of the meaning, because otherwise it's a meaningless exercise. It may have some value on a cultural side, but it's a meaningless exercise. That's all.
Thank you. Marcell, you now have to teach us a little bit more from your example.
Let's turn to 26. So this is a song written by a Brazilian guy, which has kind of traveled quite a bit. I've done it here in the U.S. in a number of contexts, and I was thinking of how to contribute to our panel in a way that was not. We've spoken about singing at the same time in different languages. We've spoken about alternating. We've spoken, and all of these are modes of doing these multilingual things together, and they are beautiful in different ways. And one of the things that I wanted to emphasize is, I think, very strongly within the Protestant vein, we tend to think of active singing as the prime mode of participation in church music, right? There's a special place in our hearts for the active appropriation of the song. And I think sometimes we leave by the roadside the receiving, the contemplative nature of listening. There's something really special about listening to a song that you may or may not know, and that is a very deep form of participation, recognizing that listening is a form of participation, especially in a world like ours where we do a lot of talking or texting or saying, but we don't do a lot of contemplating and meditating and listening, right? And there's an echo, a special kind of echo that comes from that listening, which I think could be more emphasized when we think about multilingual worship. So there's a place for there's an awkward place, I think, a special place for singing in different languages. There probably is a special place for listening to a different voice and considering that as participation, as hospitable song. So what I would like us to do, we've already done the singing in different languages at the same time. We've alternated them. We've juxtaposed them. So now what we'll do is, this is 2 parts, Portuguese and English. And it goes Portuguese, verse, right? So 1, 2, and then the second part, 1, 2. What we'll do is I'll sing number 1 in Portuguese, and we'll do number 2 in English. Okay? And then I will do the second part, which is the second page, in Portuguese, the first part, and we'll answer with the second part, we pray for power, in English. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, while you listen, and then when the time comes to sing, the song will be that echo. Pelas dores deste mundo, ó Senhor, imploramos piedade. Há só tempo geme a criação. Land and such an integral part of the whole thing. Anglican, Decanian cantori, antiphons. That rhythm is part of it. So I just wanted to emphasize that role of listening.
Jaewoo, did you have other examples to share with us?
I do, but it overlaps with other examples, so I'll pass it.
All right, okay, Ton, you had some examples to share with us.
Yes, I do. Actually, I have an extra handout, that single sheet. I hope you get that. I'm suggesting a couple of approaches that you can try. I really enjoy that multiple language, back and forth, call and response type. I come from a tradition that more like an evangelical setting. We don't use the Lord be with you and also with you, and then we don't say Kyrie eleison. Among the Chinese churches, maybe some of you have the same tradition that you do some kind of song set. The choir may sing a piece and then the sermon type. So there are less that kind of conversational dialogue type worship. So and that's sometimes that it takes away some of the opportunities, to try the other language, like Kyrie eleison, Lord of mercy. That is not in our repertoire, in our language repertoire, especially in the more evangelical setting of the worship. So I was thinking that how about thinking about introducing some Chinese songs for non-Chinese speakers, so you can taste and you can try the songs. So I came up with 3 approaches I want to introduce. Some of them has been talked about already. Get a very familiar song. Here I give an example of "Great Is Thy Faithfulness." Very familiar song. So I will pick the refrain and put the Chinese pronunciation there. One of the challenges for me, for many of you, is because Chinese language is not Latinized. So I can try German, I can try French, I can try Spanish. Even though my Spanish is not very accurate, but at least I try. I have fun with that. But if I give out a Chinese piece or Korean piece or Japanese piece to a lot of Westerners, you have no clue how to say it. So part of my learning process with my students when I was teaching choir here is, hey, let's learn a Japanese song. And then I have to confess that I don't even know Japanese. So let's learn it together. All right? So we're on the same ground. Because sometimes students say, oh yeah, good in that, of course you expect, this kind of perfection. No, we're from the same on the same ground. Let's learn Japanese. So the first part is to transliterate the Japanese, which I cannot read, into Latinized pronunciation. So if you look at the songs that I have in this book, those are not singable. So sometimes I say, okay, if you can find somebody who can help you to transliterate songs like this, "Great Is Thy Faithfulness." Okay, very familiar tune. So I put in the English words there so people know what is going on, and then put the pronunciation there. So last week I did with the Calvin College Chapel. So we gathered a very small team, and within 5 minutes they got the language. So, but because the Q sound had to be like sound, and then the particular sound, they learn it very quickly. So if you want your congregation to taste this Chinese language song, try that. Very much like the song that we sing, Silent Night. Let's try it in German, let's try it in French. Once you get the taste of it, you say, oh wow, it is fun, right? So here we have this "Great Is Thy Faithfulness." So you say, great. So if you want to try the pinyin, the transliteration, okay, we don't have to be perfect, just have a taste of the language. So, 你的心是广大. Just be careful about the Q sound. It's not like the Q sound in English. It's c sound. Okay. So just take care of that, and you should be good. All right. Let's give it a try. 你 and go. 你的心是广大，你的心是广大，清晨父清晨人经历心难。我所 because this is a good translation, it takes care of the intonation challenge. All right. So with maybe minimal instruction, you can actually sing in Chinese. So this is one way to introduce a different language to your congregation. All you have to do is to find somebody who can do the transliteration. They don't have to be very good at that, because once you know the language, like you can find a Chinese-speaking person, and Google will help you to find the transliteration. Okay, so this is one way to learn a song in different language in worship. The second approach that I am introducing here is there are some songs. They are in the Chinese style, but written in English. Okay, and these are the songs that you can find in songbooks, hymnals. And so I picked a few here, and all right. So if we can take a quick look at 150, page 17. Sorry, page 17. All right. Now remember, if you many Chinese songs are monophonic. And not just homophonic, but monophonic. So you see a tune, and then with simple accompaniment. That's the Chinese style. But because we have the English song, you can try it. And also in a worship setting, if you can find any kind of C instrument, and you can get that person to help you a lot. Because if you get a flute, a violin, or a cello, or the bassoon, something, right? And play along, and that will help, that cross the line that people can try. Okay, so here is a song that is very approachable and learnable. I'm not going to play. So let's get the key. Alright, so this is a song that in pentatonic scale. And if you print the melody, the congregation can learn it pretty easily. So let's give it a try. So Midnight Star, print it not very clearly. Okay, Midnight Star, make bright the skies. And Midnight Star, make bright the skies. If you look at the global songs, there are songs like that. The Luya, the Presbyterian hymnal, you always has a few songs that in the Chinese style. Some of them are pentatonic, some of them are not, but recently written, or sometimes they are more historic. So those are songs that you can try and very easy to learn. And there are also sheet music, octavos available. Some of the well-known music are arranged into choral music, and you can ask a choir, if you have a choir, to sing it, and then ask the congregation to join it. The third thing is, I'll just give you some links you can explore. Chinese music, church music recently has been heavily influenced by the Western contemporary style music, heavily influenced by that. So here comes a new voice of Chinese music, church music, that are very contemporary, very pop style, all right? But because of the Chinese music has its own instrumentation, its own sentimentality, and you can feel that, yeah, this is the kind of Asian sound. Japanese songs, Chinese songs, Malaysian or Vietnamese contemporary songs. But because these kind of songs are written in that local language, they are very, very hard to translate into English. It just does not work. Very much like a lot of contemporary English songs, worship songs, they don't work well when you translate into other languages. It's just awkward, all right? And there are very few that have been translated into the other languages, and that has been working very, very well. So I give you some examples. There is a God, unreserved love, So I give you some like Google links to YouTube, and you can listen to it. And once you can just find a chart and you can follow it, and that can be very, very doable. Even if you have no Chinese people in your congregation, that can be learned very easily. Alright?
Like in regional styles in the U.S., like folk music that then gets Christian lyrics or co-opted. Does that happen in Chinese as well? That there would be cultural music?
That's a real challenge that we have, because we like to be like, if you are non-Chinese speaker, you like to listen to that Chinese voice. The challenge is the Chinese people don't sing that kind of songs anymore, because that's not part of our day-to-day worship language, because it is so westernized. Okay, so now the newer contemporary style music kind of permeates the Chinese churches. That's the sound that we hear. But if you want to just have a taste of the traditional Chinese sound, these are some of the culture. But don't expect that you can hear that in a Chinese church. It's not.
So in this handout, we have many songs that Juan has shared with us from chapel in Western Theological Seminary. Perhaps you can show us some other examples.
So, some of the examples that I gave started on page 30, which we already sang. And some of these early ones are these shorter songs, these tiny songs that I talked about that come from different places, and because they're short, folks can learn them quite easily. I find it quite interesting, for me anyways, at Western, often when I'll ask some of our native Spanish speakers, what are some songs that you sing in your churches? What I get are not songs that are natively sung in Spanish. It's Chris Tomlin's How Great Is Our God, but translated in Spanish. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. Then it self-translates, right? So you can sing both Spanish and English. But some of these, I'm just going to kind of point out a couple of, so for example, if you take a look at 33, this is a very short one, but it's a very, right, it's from Pakistan, I think.
India.
India? Okay. And it's a very different sounding song than what we'll hear in most of our churches most of the time. And that is part of that function of reminding us that we're praying on behalf of and with others. So let's just try this one just for a second.
And what language specifically is it? Telugu?
It's Hindi.
Yeah, Hindi, yeah. So what's that?
I do the GIA conference.
Yeah.
I can't say I've ever seen it before.
So some of you can just sort of hold this drone. And then I'll sing the first line. Give us light, give us light. You are light, oh Lord. Now I'm going to sing it in Hindi. Jyoti do, Jyoti do, Jyoti do, Prabhu. Now you try that. Jyoti do, Jyoti do, Jyoti do, Prabhu. And you can hear some of those things like for the Prabhu on the very last line, you're supposed to slide that down, right? That's a very unusual thing to hear in Western music. And then what we'll often do is have a refrain that is in the non-English language, and then verses that we sing in English, but we keep on coming back to the refrain. So, Kwake Yesu on page 35. How many of you know that one? Kwake Yesu? Nobody knows that one? Okay, well, we're going to do that one for sure.
And the languages?
Swahili. Yeah, Swahili. So, speak after me. Kwake Yesu.
Kwake Yesu.
Nasi Mama.
Nasi Mama.
Now put that together. Kwake Yesu. Nasi Mama.
Kwake Yesu. Nasi Mama.
And the NDI, D. Just ignore the N for now. Die Mwamba. Die Mwamba. Salama. Salama. Die Mwamba. Salama. Die Mwamba. Salama. And that's just what it is the whole way through. So let's sing first in English to get the tune, and then we're going to go to the Swahili. My bad. Here on Jesus Christ the hill stand. He's the solid rock of my life. He's the solid rock of my life. He's the solid rock of my life. Waki Yesu nasimama. Diye wamba ni salama. Diye wamba ni salama. Diye wamba ni salama. This is a lovely song. In fact, if you take a careful look at the lyrics match quite closely. Come on, what's the one? On Christ the Solid, not on Christ the Solid Rock I stand.
My
What? Yes, my hope is built on nothing less. If you look at that one, the first 3 verses, right? The second verse then has to do. It's not my work that has brought me salvation, but Jesus' work. And then the last one is, and when I stand before the throne. So it's this wonderful sort of Western evangelical hymn that was planted in East African soil, and it grew up into this entirely native, different, and wonderful thing, which comes to us now as a gift. One other, so there's a lot of others here then that are that are following what Bob talked about with the self-translating, right? So it's a phrase in English and a phrase in Spanish, and you can just see what it is. So, Perdón, Señor, on page 36, that's obviously forgive us, Lord. Señor de Pan, this is a Mexican table grace that we sing at my home, and the English and the Spanish are just the same. I mean, it's a straight translation, and it's a fairly short and easy one. If you take a look at 40, Te ensalzaré, Señor. So here is one where you have the Spanish language all the way through the refrain, and then the English underneath it. But you could easily switch those up in the same way that I did with that other one that I told you about. So you could sing, Te ensalzaré, Señor. Te ensalzaré, Señor. You lifted me from danger. You lifted me from danger. I will praise you, O Lord. I will praise you, O Lord, porque me has librado. Porque me has librado. And then the last one that I want to sort of point out as actually not printed here because, so at Western, for example, when we, at the opening of all of our services, we use these 4 gestures that you saw perhaps if you were at the service this morning. We light a candle and we hold a Bible aloft and we drape a cross and we pour water into the baptismal font. And we have words that we speak with those. And most often those words are spoken in English and everybody knows them. So after a while, we don't even need to print them anymore. Everyone just knows those are what the words are. So when we come to the Spanish chapel, it's the same words. They're translated in Spanish, but we don't even need to have them up there. Everyone knows what those words, I mean, so if we do have them printed, we don't have to have them printed up in English as well to say this is what this is. We know, we've been saying this all along. And now, so we say, ven a nosotros hoy, oh Señor, ven a nosotros con luz, right, with light. And then so on with each of the other things. So this is not just in song, but also in liturgy. If there are repeated things that you say regularly, to move those into another language without making a big deal out of it. Without like saying, now we're doing it in Spanish, now we're doing it in Swahili, now we're doing it in Arabic. Just do it in one of those other languages, but people know what to expect. The visitors in your church might not, but the people who are regular people will.
Well, a huge thank you to everyone on the panel and for you guys to be with us now.
And our lunch will be in the common annex. So you have to go.
Yeah.
You have to go to the other building, look for the sign common annex, and this is the place where we are supposed to have our meal. So we will do a prayer for the meal, and we will do this multilingual. So yeah, I will do a brief prayer in Spanish, and you will respond. We'll do this 3 times. In the response, you choose the language. I want you to respond this way. With thank you, Lord, or gracias, Señor, obrigado, Señor, or I don't know. Well, we are multilingual community. So, por esta mañana hermosa que nos permite estar aquí juntos.
Gracias.
Por el don de tu iglesia en todo este mundo hermoso que tú has creado.
Gracias.
Y por tu provisión y los alimentos que siempre nos provees.
Gracias.
In the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Gracias.